The rain had just started to fall when I opened that worn manila folder behind Mark's shop, and the streetlight above us flickered like it was reacting to the truth I was about to see. My hands were trembling before I even understood why, before the photographs and documents inside sliced through every assumption I'd ever made about the man tied to my family. If you've ever felt that sickening moment when your entire world shifts under your feet, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this happen more often than we admit. I remember the cold bite of the night air, the smell of oil and wet asphalt, the way my heartbeat felt too loud in my ears as I realized my daughter and grandchildren were in danger. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I still remember the way the air felt behind that little auto shop in Asheville, North Carolina. Cool, quiet, almost too calm for what was about to land in my hands. I had stopped by because a man I trusted called me and said he needed to show me something. I thought it would be about a repair or some small favor. Instead, he slipped a thin folder toward me, and the world I knew shifted in an instant. Inside were records, photographs, documents, things I could barely process, showing that my son-in-law wasn't who he claimed to be. Not just a different name, but an entirely different life, buried under lies he had woven so tightly that even I, someone who always paid attention, hadn't seen through them. As I stood there, staring at page after page, all I could think about was my daughter and my grandchildren sitting at home with a man I suddenly realized I didn't know at all. My chest felt tight. My mind jumped from fear to disbelief to a kind of cold, steady dread. I kept trying to make sense of it, searching for any explanation that didn't end in danger. But the more I looked, the more that hope slipped away. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something darker. And that was the moment everything started to unravel. Before I can explain how we got from that parking lot to the truth that finally came out, I need to go back to where this really began, long before I had any reason to suspect a thing. Before everything spiraled into the truth I never asked to find. Life felt steady in a way I had worked hard to earn. I was 63, a widow who had spent the past few years learning how to hold my own again. Asheville had become my anchor, with its quiet mornings, familiar faces, and routines that brought me a sense of calm I once thought I'd lost for good. Most days revolved around my daughter Melissa and my two grandchildren, Sophie and Caleb. They were the center of my world, and I tried to be the person they could always count on, whether it was helping with school pickups, bringing over dinner, or just being a steady presence in their home. I liked feeling useful. After losing my husband, those small acts of care helped pull me forward. Back then, Ryan seemed like a decent enough son-in-law. He worked long hours, talked about providing for his family, and made an effort to seem dependable. There were moments when something about him felt slightly off, but I brushed those thoughts aside. Families are complicated, and I didn't want to be the mother who looked for flaws where none existed. Looking back, I can see how the quiet days were already shifting, how small pieces were nudging me toward something I wasn't prepared to face. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where I offered to help without thinking twice. Ryan mentioned he needed someone to pick up his car from a detail shop across town, and I immediately said I'd handle it. I had no idea that simple favor would open the door to everything that came next. I remember walking into Mark Cameron's shop that afternoon and feeling something tighten in my chest before I even reached the counter. The place was usually loud with compressors and casual chatter, but that day it felt strangely still. Mark looked up at me, and there was a heaviness in his eyes that made me pause. It was the kind of look people give when they're about to do something they wish they didn't have to do. He motioned for me to follow him to the back office, and that quiet unease grew into something sharper. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, that maybe he'd found an issue with the car or needed an extra signature. But when he pulled out that folder and slid it toward me, every bit of normalcy I had been holding on to slipped away. Inside were IDs, different names, different states, different faces that were all somehow Ryan's. There were screenshots of accounts I'd never heard of, money moving in and out in ways that made my stomach clench. And then I saw it. A reservation for a one-way trip to Belize for Ryan, Sophie, and Caleb. Not Melissa. Just the children. I felt the room tilt. My hands shook so badly I had to press them against my legs to steady myself. Mark quietly mentioned that he had shown the documents to a friend of his, a retired federal investigator named Ken Dalton, someone who had spent years tracking people who built entire lives on lies. Ken believed Ryan fit the pattern too well, patient, rehearsed, and always targeting families with emotional vulnerabilities. Hearing that felt like cold water pouring down my spine. In that moment, fear gave way to something fiercer. My daughter and grandchildren weren't just living with a liar. They were in danger. I knew I had to warn Melissa, no matter how she reacted. I remember pulling into Melissa's driveway with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs from the inside. Her house looked the same as always, warm lights glowing through the windows, toys scattered near the porch, the familiar comfort of a home where children felt safe. It hurt to look at it, knowing what I had just learned, knowing what might be hiding underneath the life she thought she had. When she opened the door, she looked tired but peaceful, the way young mothers often do at the end of a long day. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. I wanted to protect that calm for her. I wanted to pretend everything was still fine. But the folder in my bag felt like a weight pulling me toward the truth, and I couldn't ignore it. I started explaining, gently at first, trying to show her the pieces of what I had found. I watched her face change from confusion to disbelief, then to something sharper, hurt, anger, the feeling of being cornered by something she didn't want to look at. She kept shaking her head, insisting I was mistaken, that I was letting my worry get the best of me. I could feel her pulling away from me with every word I spoke. It was like watching a door close in slow motion. When she finally asked me to leave, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a finality that cut straight through me. I felt like I had failed her in the very moment I was trying to save her. Walking back to my car, I felt hollow. I knew she didn't believe me. I knew she wasn't ready. And yet the danger was still there, closer than she realized. As I drove away, I understood I would have to find another way to protect them, one that didn't depend on her believing me yet. When I drove back to Mark Cameron's shop that evening, I felt wrung out, like every ounce of strength had been scraped from me. Failing to reach Melissa left a hollow ache in my chest, but I knew I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Mark and Ken Dalton were waiting in the back office, both of them wearing the same grim expression that told me the situation was even worse than I understood. Ken spread out the documents again, this time walking me through patterns he had seen too many times in his career. The careful charm, the calculated isolation, the slow drip of control disguised as responsibility. As he talked, I felt a sickening weight settle over me. Every moment when Melissa drifted a little further from me, every time she defended Ryan or brushed off my concern, it all made sense in a way I wished it didn't. He had been tightening his hold on her for years, right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. That guilt was crushing. I kept replaying the look on her face when she told me to leave, the way she clung to the version of Ryan she needed to believe in. I wanted to blame her denial, but deep down, I blamed myself for not noticing sooner. While we were sorting through the timeline, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was short, cold, and unmistakably targeted. A warning to stop looking. My stomach dropped. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but walking out to my car erased any doubt. My windshield had been smashed clean through, glass glittering across the seats like shards of ice. Fear washed over me in a wave so strong I had to brace myself against the door frame. Someone wanted me silenced. Someone close enough to know exactly where I'd be. But beneath that fear was something steadier, a rising determination that surprised even me. If Ryan thought intimidation would stop me, he didn't understand a mother's resolve. We needed more proof, undeniable proof, before I could try again, or bring this to the authorities. And I knew the window for action was closing fast. It was close to 8:30 that night when my phone rang, and the moment I heard Melissa's voice, I knew something inside her had finally cracked. She sounded shaken in a way I had never heard before, as if the ground under her feet had given out. I drove to her house with my heart in my throat, bracing myself for whatever truth she had finally allowed herself to see. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, bank statements, and screenshots. Her hands trembled as she pushed them toward me, and I could see the devastation in her eyes before she said a word. She had found transfers she didn't authorize, money missing in amounts that made her sick. There were messages from another woman, warm, familiar exchanges that left no room for denial. And then, the worst of it, a folder she discovered hidden in Ryan's toolbox containing fake passports for Sophie and Caleb, matching the Belize reservation I had already seen. Seeing her children's faces on documents meant to erase them from their lives here nearly brought her to her knees. She broke down, and for a long moment we just held on to each other. I felt sorrow for her pain, relief that she finally saw the truth, and a fierce protectiveness rising in me all at once. She whispered that she should have listened, that she had been so blind, and I told her none of this was her fault. When she finally steadied herself, she called the police. The detective she spoke with was calm, methodical, already piecing together the timeline and preparing to move quickly. Hearing that gave us a small anchor in the chaos. We sat together in the quiet afterward, waiting for the next step, unaware that another threat, a deeper part of Ryan's world, was already closing in on us. For a moment after Ryan was taken into custody, I allowed myself to breathe. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was the first time in days I felt the ground steady under my feet. That calm didn't last long. The next morning, another anonymous message appeared on my phone, short, sharp, and unmistakably threatening. It was clear someone else was watching. When I showed the message to the detective, his expression told me everything before he spoke. They had uncovered evidence that Ryan hadn't been working alone. There was another man involved, someone who helped move money, arrange documents, and keep tabs on anyone who got too close to the truth. Knowing that someone out there had been tracking me sent a chill straight through my spine. The next 2 days were filled with a tension that sat heavy in my chest. I noticed a car idling too long near my street, footsteps on gravel late at night, small signs that gnawed at my nerves. Then came the breaking point. Literally. I heard the sound of my back door rattling just after 11, followed by the unmistakable creak of someone attempting to force their way in. For a split second, fear froze me in place. Then something stronger pushed through, a fierce instinct to protect my family, no matter what it cost. The police arrived fast. They caught the man hiding near the tree line behind my house, and hearing the cuffs snap closed around his wrists brought a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought me to tears. But as shaken as I was, I also felt something else rising, a determination to see this through, and soon I would learn we weren't the only ones he had hurt. Other survivors were already stepping forward, ready to join forces as the case moved toward trial. When the detective told me Ryan had hurt other families, I felt something inside me break all over again. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that his reach stretched far beyond our home. There were women from different towns, different years, each carrying their own version of the same wound. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed by the scale of it. Then something steadier took hold, a need to make sure none of us faced this alone. I began reaching out, one call at a time. Some of the women were hesitant, some were angry, and others sounded relieved that someone finally understood what they'd been living with. When we met for the first time in a small community room at the library, the air felt heavy with shared hurt. But as we talked, that heaviness began to shift. Each woman told pieces of her story, how the deception started, how the control tightened, how their lives slowly shrank around them. I saw resilience in every face, even when their voices trembled. Melissa joined us quietly at first, sitting close to me, listening more than speaking. But as the weeks passed, she began opening up, letting the group hold her in a way she hadn't been able to before. Watching her regain her strength through their support was one of the few bright spots in that dark season. Soon it was time to focus on the trial. We met with the prosecutor, reviewed evidence, and learned what would be required of us when we took the stand. It was intimidating, but there was a fire in that room, a shared determination to stop Ryan from ever hurting anyone again. By the time we finalized our testimonies, we had become more than victims. We were a united front, ready to walk into the courtroom together. And that moment was coming fast. The morning we walked into the courthouse, it felt as though the entire weight of the past years settled on my shoulders. I wasn't alone. Melissa was beside me, and behind us came the women who had found the strength to stand with us. Even in our fear, there was a quiet unity, a shared resolve that carried us through those doors. When I took the stand, the room blurred for a moment under the pressure of it all. But once I began to speak, something shifted. I felt the truth steady me. I told them about the lies, the manipulation, the danger that nearly swallowed our family whole. My voice trembled at times, but I didn't break. I wouldn't give him that. One by one, the other survivors followed. Their voices wavered, their hands shook, but their courage filled the room. Each story added another piece to the picture of who Ryan really was. Then the accomplice testified, revealing details that turned my stomach: financial movements, hidden plans, the role he played in helping Ryan prepare to disappear with my grandchildren. Hearing it spoken aloud made the reality sharper and more brutal than I ever imagined. The prosecutor was relentless, laying out Ryan's patterns with a clarity that left no room for doubt. I watched the defense struggle, offering explanations that fell apart the moment they touched the evidence. And I saw it. The shift in the jury's faces as understanding settled in. Deliberation felt endless. Every minute stretched into another wave of anxiety. But when the jury returned, their expressions told me everything before the four persons spoke. Guilty on every count. Sentencing came quickly afterward. Listening to the judge outline each charge, each consequence, felt like a long-held breath finally releasing. Relief washed over me in a way I can barely describe. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was real, solid, standing right there in that courtroom. As we stepped outside into the cool air, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, of healing, of rebuilding, of finding our way forward again. In the weeks after the trial, the world finally seemed to exhale with us. The noise and fear that had filled every corner of our days began to fade, replaced by a quiet steadiness I had almost forgotten was possible. I watched Melissa move through her home with a different kind of strength, cleaning out old drawers, making plans, reclaiming spaces that had once felt shadowed. There were moments when grief caught up with her, but even then, I could see something rebuilding inside her, one honest step at a time. The children changed, too. Sophie started humming again while she colored, and Caleb returned to dragging his little backpack around the house as if adventures might spill out of it at any moment. Simple things, breakfast at the kitchen table, homework spread across the floor, their laughter drifting down the hallway, felt like proof that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in small, steady pieces. As for me, I let myself lean into the comfort of companionship. The man who had stood by me through the darkest months didn't push, didn't rush, just showed up with quiet steadiness. A cup of coffee on my porch, a hand on my shoulder after a long day. I found myself opening up in ways I didn't expect at this age, realizing that second chances don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just grow naturally, right where you are. Family dinners became a new ritual. Melissa would bring a casserole. The kids would insist on setting the table, and we'd sit together, letting conversation and warmth fill the spaces where fear once lived. Looking back, I can see that we didn't simply survive what happened. We rebuilt our lives with intention, tenderness, and a deeper understanding of what it means to love and protect one another. And as we stepped into this new chapter, I felt a quiet certainty that the hardest part was finally behind us, and something brighter was waiting just ahead. There are moments in life that change you so completely that you know you'll never return to who you were before. Looking back on everything we went through, I can still feel the echoes of fear, the weight of uncertainty, and the quiet determination that kept me moving when I wanted to collapse. But I can also see the strength that rose from all of it, the way my family held on to one another even when the ground felt like it was falling away. We didn't come out of this untouched. There are memories that still sting, and nights when I sit on my porch and let the past drift through my mind. But those moments no longer control me. They remind me of what we survived, of the courage that showed up even when I didn't feel brave, and of the love that carried us through the worst parts. Today, our lives are steady again. My daughter laughs more easily. My grandchildren run freely without fear, and I've found a deeper faith in myself than I ever expected at this age. Healing didn't arrive all at once, but it arrived. If you've ever faced something that shook your world, I'd love to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one,